Gray yard, cold men, a wind that steals courage, and then asks what you're going to do about it. The field kitchen's kettle sulks over a stingy fire, the quartermaster's cart rattles up with meat trimmings, biscuit scrap, and a sack of pea meal that looks lighter than hope and works harder. You are the freshest victualer's mate, handed the ladle, a dipstick notched in quartz, and a stub of chalk that will make friends or enemies depending on your wrist. If you like watching a meal become a policy that keeps feet moving, tap subscribe and ring the bell. We're going to thicken a morning without stirring a riot. Orders are plain in the way difficult tasks pretend to be. Boil clean, thicken with ground peas enough to make the march, keep lads upright, post the measure on the kettle rim. You start where cooks and laws both start, washing the vessel and naming the ratio. Copper up, fire under. You boil the brook because the brook does not care about your intentions. The copper sasses, then obeys. You scour the pot with hot water and vinegar until oak and iron stop smelling like last night's decisions. You run the dipstick down the big kettle's side and notch the memory with your thumb. Chalk waits to be told where to hold the day. The sack's mouth is laced like a purse. You loosen it, and the smell of peas meal comes up, blunt and honest, the way country people tell the truth about rain. Sift, don't dump. You take a sieve between your hands and let ground peas become weather in the steam. Whisk, not lash. You use the ladle like a paddle and draw circles that promise not to punish anybody's mouth. The broth thickens the way paper dries. By degrees your nerves don't admire until the result looks inevitable. A drummer boy appears with his wisdom preloaded. Pea paste is theft, he whispers, which is how mutinies are born. Behind teeth, with rumor to nurse them. You show him the hand sign you learned last week. 2 fingers like a pair of legs, then the palm flat. Make it travel. He scowls, then learns to be hungry politely. The captain arrives where captains do, not to help but to mean it when he says the thing you were already doing. He points at the sack. Make it travel. His eye finds your chalk hand. He has learned to trust arithmetic over adjectives. You thicken the kettle to the first ring you chalk around the iron, 1 ladle meat broth to 1 scoop pea meal, and wait while the lads' noses decide it's still food. If you go too far, men grumble glue and the song dies in their throats. If you leave it thin, the march frays and everyone pretends they knew it would. Either way, you must post the issue strength before first halt. The first drama of the day stays humble. A lad leans in with his cup before count. The sergeant's palm returns the lid to the kettle with a flat noise that writes a proverb on his forehead. Not yet. The boy backs off with the shame that builds competence. You let him keep his dignity by not making a moral out of a wrist. You measure like a man teaching a horse to breathe. Dipstick in, up, wet line matched to chalk ring. The men see this twice on purpose. First, because you are honest. Second, because seeing makes the rumor of theft search for cheaper work. You bang the rim with the ladle's heel, the agreed-upon drumbeat, and issue by the book, gills for the small lads, pints for the steady, jacks for the ones the surgeon didn't excuse. Biscuit scrap rains in at the end like applause nobody asked for. Pea thick buys you 3 things the day intends to spend: fuel saved by shorter boils, bellies steadied without spirits, and the lesson barely anyone notices they're learning, that a chalk ring can quiet more men than a threat. You chalk today's circle, 1 to 1. The captain's eye relaxes by the width of a coin. He doesn't smile because he is careful with indulgence. The drummer boy discovers that glue would have stuck more than this did, and his scowl forgets itself. You add meat trimmings sparingly, not because you're a miser, but because the road is. Fat wants to sell you heat, you buy only the light that will travel. You sift more pea meal when the boil returns without temper. You whisk with the patience of a man who would rather shout later than lurch now. The wind learns it cannot bully the steam. The men learn to accept warmth that doesn't sing. The chalk ring sits on the kettle rim like a contract. It won't save you if you're wrong, but it will help you remember how to be right again tomorrow. You keep a private ledger the way wagoners keep saints. Yesterday's thin when a brook made you hasty. Last week's heavy when the hill argued you into mercy. Last winter's peas days when even meat wanted to be remembered more than eaten. An alewife's old ledger lives under the plank with margins that are braver than yours. She had a century's practice getting people to mistake prudence for comfort. Hidden worlds accumulate around kitchens. The cooper's kit for hooping the copper hides in the limber chest, just in case the boil decides to be a hero. The surgeon's folded list of bowels for given spirits sits near your chalk because medicine and porridge are neighbors in this town. Hand signs evolve without meetings, thick a pinch leaned into, thin a hand wobble, enough palm flat, move along 2 fingers walking forward. You teach them to the lad who scowled earlier, and he takes them the way boys take knives, pleased and wary. The first halt has its own manners. Drum taps to ration, tuck, tuck, tuck. And you post the strength where boots can read, not where mouths can invent. 1 to 1, you write on the iron in chalk that will need reminding at noon. The provost circulates like a bad smell you can prove is yours. He produces a book that pretends to be a conscience. You let him watch the dipstick kiss the ring. He leans into your circle and smells the broth. You lean him back out again with the handle of your ladle and a smile that knows how to be a barrier. You set up the rota. Carriers to the kettle, 2 for canteens, 1 for quicklime where horses have opinions, and chalk to the steadiest hand in each squad. White threads on cups for water cut, blue for the men the surgeon wants braver broth, yellow for the fatigue party who will regret volunteering. Issued, returned, rinsed, set by. Your ledger learns to repeat itself until it becomes a song. A printer's ink bottle, which doesn't belong here, tips over on your cupbook because someone thought the day needed irony. You flip your sleeve into the spill, preserve the column of names, and add 3 in your head while your hand cleans. 2 squads swap cups in the sun because habit is faster than orders. You reassign in the dark under a wagon's lantern before anyone has time to admire how wrong they were. The march smells like peas when it remembers the kitchen. Men remark on their own regularity with the pride humans reserve for their most honest functions. The surgeon thanks you without words by not sending anyone to your bench with a folded list and a frown. The captain passes your kettle twice and does not slow to check your ring the second time. That is the compliment you came to earn. If it were you at the iron, if the wind stole courage and a lad called glue, would you go 1 to 1 or less at the first ring? Drop 1 to 1 or thinner in the mess tin below, and where you're watching from. I read those when the copper huffs itself toward lunch, and the chalk asks whether it belongs on the rim again. You bank the fire like a man putting a temper to bed. You cover the kettle when eyes need to be taught patience. You move the chalk to the far side when hands need to be taught humility. You rinse, you whisk, you write, you post. The road takes what you hand it. The men take what the road allows. The whole column learns a new rule so quietly that later they will swear they invented it themselves. When the ring says enough, we go. That is how pea flour becomes a law. Reviel shakes the canvas like a big dog shedding rain. You're on your feet before the drum remembers its duty, because the copper prefers to be woken politely. Fire under, boil clean, chalk the ring, sift and whisk. If you like watching a routine tame a morning, without anyone needing to shout, "Stick with me, I'll put a quiet poll at the end for how you'd handle a certain provost when he sniffs around your kettle." Steam climbs, tallow smoke lays its thin sermon along the wagons. The kettle sulks, then accepts heat. You run the dipstick down the iron, touch the wet notch with your thumb, and draw today's circle on the rim so arithmetic outranks appetite. Pea meal goes in by sieve, not by fist, whisk, not lash. The broth thickens into travel, not glue. Chalk ticks on the kettle mark the first issue, 1 ladle to 1 scoop. You'll defend that ring with a straight wrist and a better reason than thrift. Cups in a row look like order pretending to be a festival. You knot threads on their handles, white for water cut, blue for the convalescent stronger ladle the surgeon will fight for, yellow for the fatigue party you will ask too much from by noon. The laundry rope strung between wagons airs the rinsed ones, drip by patient drip, because mold will not be invited to the march. Sequence set, rota pegged. 2 carriers to the kettle each halt, 1 to the canteens, 1 to sprinkle quicklime where horses made the flags slick, chalk to the steadiest hand in each squad. Your ledger opens and learns its verbs again like a song with 4 notes: issued, returned, rinsed, set by. Peel for halt. The circle forms by habit, not command. Pints by squad, dipstick checked in front of the file. Public virtue, private speed. You plant the stick, lift, show wet line kissing chalk ring. A cup tries to get clever, you turn its handle back with 2 fingers and a face that keeps dignity cheap. A porter at the edge murmurs extra dips as if time could be rented. You point him at the warden's book with the kind of smile that makes men look for another trade. The broth steam makes even the suspicious remember food. Provost arrives with a book that believes it is a conscience. Inspection, he says, rehearsed. If you let him inside the circle, you'll stir gossip, refuse, and he will leave with their cheated. Either way, the noon boil won't wait. You draw the threshold with your ladle's heel, you'll see the stick meet, the ring, you tell him, and let the public arithmetic do the talking. He leans, smells, thinks better of it when 3 dozen wrists remember the sign for move along. The march moves. At the second halt, an ink bottle no one admits owning tips itself across your cupbook as if the day wanted humor. You slide your sleeve under the spill, rescue the column with the names that matter, and add 3 from memory, while your hand blots and your face pretends not to be busy. 2 squads swap cups by habit, blue in a white hand, white in a blue, and you reassign in the dark under a wagon as a lantern crawls closer, because sometimes dignity needs a shadow to change clothes in. A friar palms you a chit from the townsman, wax decorous, words ambitious. Opened by order, someone dared write. You slide it under the ledger where vinegar sweat has taught other papers the language of patience. Later, if at all. So, refill from a lined well the beetle swears is honest. You boil anyway because the brook doesn't care who swears. Pea meal in while biscuit scrap reigns. Whisk the lumps out of other men's daydreams. Saturday strong used to be a joke. Now the board says sick list first and the surgeon pretends he didn't need your help remembering. Blue thread cups land under the ladle and go away warmer than they arrived. A corporal with a new mustache produces a folded open by order for a private dram. The seal's swagger is all hat, no head. You rest your palm on it until the wax learns humility and file it next to the friar's note. He will hate you by evening and forget you by morning. That is the correct tempo for dislikes in a moving army. Between halts, you keep the small machinery from inventing noise. Rinsed, set by, chalk ticks, rope creaks. Men who thought pea paste is theft learn to be grateful to their own insides without laying compliments at your feet. The surgeon's folded list of bowels forgiven spirit stays folded. That is thanks enough. Dusk, billet door. Last issue. The kettle glows like an obedient coal because the rule allows it and you didn't show off. A lad from the fatigue party arrives with 2 yellow thread cups and an apology. You rinse one, strengthen the other, and nod at his face until pride comes back to it. He'll haul a wheel out of a rut tomorrow and not know why he had the extra in him. Corruption and cover keep their appointments. The porter tries extra dips again to a civilian who doesn't belong here. A watchman corrects geography with his shadow. The provost returns with a better word and worse timing. You draw the threshold again, show the stick, the ring, the cup. Enough theater without turning policy into an audience. Your second, secret slate, 3 corporals who never cue, glows in the back of your coat. You erase one name because he shared a tent in last night's rain. The other 2 you carry like a splinter you plan to earn the right to remove. If it were your circle, if a provost wanted inside to quiet rumor or leave with a "recheated," which would you choose, threshold only or inside inspection? Drop your vote and where you're watching from. I read those after the last ladle, when the chalk asks if it belongs on the rim again. You bank the fire, you chalk tomorrow's narrower ring where your hand can find it at first light, you hang the cups to breathe. The rota pegs wait, the quicklime sits like a promise in a bucket, the ledger sleeps with its 4 verbs like a harmless prayer. Routine settles with the dust. Men drift into billets steadier than they arrived. You taught them a quiet rule with a chalk circle and a ladle. Tomorrow they will swear they invented it themselves. That's how you know it's working. Frost tightens the taps, and the bung weeps a sulky bead. The kettle looks offended. The ink in your well has the manners of a cat. You fetch warm wax for the seam, a bit of lead if the sulk turns serious, and nick the clogged quill with your knife until the nib remembers its purpose. If you like watching a lie lose customers without anyone raising a voice, stick close. We're going to boil, rinse, whisk, and ladle in full view, quiet proof against a loud myth. At the inn door, a market man retells his canard as if the town owes it rent. They water your pay with peas. He tries it in 3 keys to see which one the crowd will hire. The warden doesn't give him a line. He lays his palm on the cordon bar. Warden's peace at the cordon. That sentence fits the timber like a hoop. To you, short orders, demonstration without spectacle. Cups counted in the open. Sick list warmed first. Chalk fresh on the board. From the church steps the sacrist adds, no clatter, mass. You take that one into your elbows. Heat in cloth, not in noise. Copper up, fire under. Boil clean. Rinse the big kettle hot so iron forgets yesterday's sins. Vinegar for pot health, not for show. Sieve in the peas while the brook-turned water stops trying to be river. Whisk like you're paying a debt, firm, not frantic. The thick builds travel, not glue. You plant the dipstick, lift it where boot eyes can see the wet notch kiss the chalk ring. You let the number be your argument. Choice comes early and rude. The rope lowers at the eaves. Upper window hoists cleaner, faster. The surgeon's bench grows a shadow. Sick row, needier, slower. Send warmth to the sick and you starve the first line. Divert to the line and the wise woman will remember. You touch the blue thread cups the surgeon set aside and let need win the morning. You cradle the first hot cup under cloth and cross the aisle the cordon has taught the crowd to respect. The wise woman nods once, small as good bread. Count the cups, the warden says without moving his jaw. You do it where mouths can't improve the figures, tally slate up. Chalk ticks beside 2 new columns you drew last night, because councils like diagrams. Fuel saved, bowel saved. 2 ticks under fuel shorter boil, thicker carry. 1 under bowels the surgeon will growl, then admit it. You leave space for the day to brag again later. A clerk from the captain's table skates in with a ration sheet torn down the spine. Paste, thread, the little iron he keeps under a cuff in defiance of 6 rules. You hold a corner while he coaxes paper back into sequence. No clatter, mass, the sacrist reminds the air when the clerk's needle thinks about sounding important. You stir at half speed so the kettle keeps its temper. The market man tries again. Water your pay with peas. You answer by making arithmetic public. Dipstick to ring, ladle to cup. Count out loud in a voice that belongs to pens. 1 ladle, 1 scoop, 1 chalk. A herald's trumpet slices the rising talk into contributory silence. The cellarer hisses move at a knot of shoulders that thought they were policy. They remember they are not. A boy at the spigot sags with the weight of his jack. You get an arm under his forearms and your slate under his elbow before he decides to fold. He laughs the quiet laugh men make when they choose dignity over gravity. The rope above creaks, a cup lands true. Upper window gets its turn. Sick row stays ahead by 3. Your rota, unwritten but learned, breathes like a good mule. An apothecary strolls the fence with a sentence he has been dying to sell. Small beer and peas balance humors. He pronounces balance as if he were the inventor. A priest across the bar sees chalk sigils blossoming on 2 cups and says, "No charms on vessels." You wipe the marks away with a vinegar rag and put the matter in your book where it belongs. Device, not charm. Tools are allowed their dignity. Magic is prohibited for being lazy. You ladle in the open. Count in the open. Rinse where a passerby can see that cloth and hot water are the city's answer to rumor. A porter tries to rent an extra dip to a man with the wrong boots. The warden's clerk leans into his shadow until the attempt dies of modesty. Sureties for good behavior at noon. You chalk under the board's new headings because today needs to be reminded it has a later. The council bell lifts a hush. You pin a fresh scrap where eyes gather, ratio 1 to 1, sick first, public count. Then you let the work talk. Whisk, ladle, count. Whisk, ladle, count. The market man runs out of breath before you run out of cups. A gust meddles, and a passerby gets a glimpse of the brazier. His mouth shapes luxury, then learns a new word when you bring the ladle to the chalk ring, the ring to the count to his eyes. Rule, he says to his shoes, and goes where errands live. The sacrist relaxes his palm on the church door. Mass keeps its quiet. The clerk returns with thread tails on his fingers and a face that thinks he saved an empire because a ration sheet believes him. Let him. You need him clear-eyed at dusk when the billet door becomes the city's favorite theater. A woman from the sick row presses a rosemary sprig into your hand without looking at you. To keep hands sweet, she tells the cloth, you crumble it into the rinse and the steam remembers decency. The surgeon's folded list of bowels for given spirits stays folded. He nods toward your chalk columns as if you both knew what saved the city last winter and have agreed to call it prudence. You make the chalk ticks again before noon. Fuel saved now 3, bowels saved 2, and set the dipstick where the provost can see it meet the ring without being invited inside. He circles with a book pretending to be a conscience. You draw the threshold with the ladle's heel and let no clatter. Mass do more work than your mouth. The crowd pays attention to its errands by the time your copper hums for the second boil. Biscuit scrap rains, you whisk lumps out of the daydreams. You pass blue thread cups to the surgeon with a nod that spends no nouns. The warden checks the board, confirms the ticks, and leaves his palm on the bar for tradition, not necessity. If it were your morning, if the rope lowered at the eaves while the sick row sent for heat, who fills first, windows or sick row? Drop your vote and where you're watching from. I read those when the brazier is banked and the chalk decides it belongs on the rim again. By mid-afternoon, proof looks like furniture. Men lean against the board and call the columns obvious. The market man goes looking for a better myth. The kettle's ring holds, the stick agrees, the cups return at the pace a city will tolerate. You fold the vinegar rag over your palm and wipe the rim where a hand tried to become a sigil again. Device, not charm. You remind the habit that wanted magic. You count one last time, whisper the numbers to the warden's clerk, and let the steam speak without words. The myth has fewer customers. That will do. Torches gutter and make the yard look smaller than it is. Gates bar with that elbow-deep clunk that tells everyone the day has been taken away for its own good. Word, which owes nobody obedience, walks past the yard anyway and hires a chorus. Monkley cups, glue for guts. The square likes a rhyme when it thinks it is owed meat. Inside, the hall meets by candle to do what good halls do when the town won't, turn mockery into policy. The beadle taps your plank twice with the stick that believes it runs the night. Copy fair. Copy fast, flawless. You square the sheet and teach your quill to behave. Public notice, quiet passage to and from the ration. You write it where boots will be forced to read before mouths can improvise. Fines, written as alms because the cellarer likes the sound, for cup losses. Sick list first. On paper, orders to post the day's ratio each dawn so rumor wakes up already unemployed. You leave the small doors a city needs to breathe, save collapse, save fever, save order under strain. Sand hisses, the line goes matte. Before it dries, a flare blooms at the back shed. Orange takes rafters like it paid. You and 2 boys are already moving. Buckets arrive in your hands as if they'd been waiting their whole lives. Wet wool hisses on embered planks. The line at the gate, which had been auditioning for Riot, forgets its lyrics long enough to watch Flame learn manners. The last puddle sulks itself into steam. Rosemary and vinegar go back to their quieter work of pretending order is a smell. Back at the plank, the beetle plants a knuckle on the margin. A small slip slides under your thumb with the practiced innocence of a profitable sin. Keep this quiet, the neat hand says. You lay it under the cup book and rest your palm on it until your bone answers for you. Omit it forever. The outer bar finds a new lyric. Glue for guts, Monkley cups. The clerk from the hall leans toward the warden and breathes moderation like a man who hopes the word will stop being borrowed and start being his. You keep copying. Sick list first. Ratio at dawn. Fines for cup losses. The beetle's cough, which has never had good timing, discovers the worst line and puts itself there. You keep the curve of the S straight, as if dignity could be written into curls. A coin rings on your plank and refuses to shine. The dead carrier's sister sets her only round where the ink can look at it, shoulders like broom handles, mouth that learned to be brave before it learned to be polite. 5 words different, she says. Save the sick from strong broth, not louder than anybody else. Truer. You put your pen to the place in the notice where exceptions live without breeding and teach it that sentence. Sick list ration to be watered and warmed before irons, before questioning, before noise. The beetle clears his throat again, the way men do when they plan to tell a room the idea was theirs later. Let him. The sentence needs work more than it needs ancestry. Under the guest loft, a trap yawns. Men step down into the dim and find their private definitions of mercy. Extra cups, extra ladles. A porter has discovered he likes accounting with his palm. You make a mark in your head where nails will go in the morning. Your hand writes nothing, not yet. You carry the fresh notice to the gate. Key rings stacked like teeth on the bailiff's belt chatter when the cartwheel squeals its old grievance against the cobbles. Someone shames it with grease, and the purr returns. You nail the paper where hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum under the board gives the words a little spine. Suspense has learned how to sit on your shoulder. If the jeers aren't answered, the bar will try to be a song. If you answer wrong, your name joins the stone the clerk keeps oiled to be silenced. Either way, the noon boil will not wait, and the column deserves a mourning more than your pride does. Inside, tallies of cup immersements line up under your pencil. Recognizances with awkward crosses shiver into place, some firm, some sideways, some looking like the hands that made them would prefer tools to pens. Rosemary and vinegar steam raise the room's patience like bread. The astrologer wanders in, announces the hour lucky if men stop talking, then shoves the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds gather over the eaves. Nobody pays him. He doesn't take it personally. A patron's runner produces a folded chit with wax that thinks Polish equals authority. Open by order, it claims, and points its chin at the margin you didn't leave. You set it under the ledger next to the beetle's slip, and let your palm teach paper patience until it dies of it. Now, the contested name, it warms your pocket like a small, guilty stove. A corporal whose cousin stands too often with the steward under the arch expects to appear on the sick roster tomorrow, because entitlement has learned how to stand near heat. He does not belong there. Another name does. The convalescent who returned his cup and his temper 3 times this week. The woman who swore truth when adjectives were cheap. Erase or obey. Unlock or relock. You lay the bad name on the plank over the rosemary tack and let friction pretend to be fate. You set him aside. You write the other in a hand the column has learned to trust and punish. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. The town will teach you later what it costs to be recognized by your letters. The beetle coughs again at the line he will have to defend to men who look like his friends. The warden signs with the letter that never learned to be ashamed of itself. The clerk from the hall smooths the page with 2 fingers as if he intends to recite it elsewhere and own a share. A friar palms you a chit from the townsman. You let him watch you file it in the drawer where paper goes to learn decency. You walk to the trap under the loft and lift the hatch with your stave. Extra dips? You ask the darkness. Paid ladles? The porter's smile turns into someone else's. You count. 2 more than were posted, 2 fewer than were sworn. The cellarer's hand finds your shoulder with the weight of a promise that owns nails. Make it a line, his thumb says. You nod. Morning will learn carpentry. The outer bar leans again, and a herald's trumpet cuts the sound into compliant pieces. You read the notice aloud because policy grows up when it hears itself. Quiet passage. Fines for cup losses. Sick list first. Ratio at dawn. The market man tries glue for guts one more time and watches the board absorb it like an old stain that stopped telling stories. If it were your plank, if a sister's coin rang dull where your sand was still drying, if a patron's slip asked your margin to forget itself, if a name in your pocket believed it was entitled to warmth, would you omit or obey? Put omit or obey and where you're watching from. I read those after the last vinegar steam thins and the beetle practices a cough that belongs to someone else. You knot the notice where the drum can stand behind it. You file the coin in the dish that will be the only place tonight where money does its job. You file the chits in the drawer that kills them softly. You leave the contested name where rosemary can keep it from sticking to your hand again. You bank the brazier, torches gutter, gates bar. The hall smells like ink that decided to be honest and smoke that learned restraint. The column outside is learning your quiet rules by chalk and cup instead of threat. That is the price of peas on paper, and it is a bargain the road will keep. Dawn lifts the yard's latch. Trumpets wet their lips. Drums remember the beat you taught them to trust. The velvet voice climbs its crate by the bar and hangs the morning where everyone can see it. His grace commends those who kept quiet order at the ration bench. You feel the words go on ahead of you like scouts. Ratio is chalked on the kettle rim because a bargain in ink said it would be. Windows stand open to the square's new honesty. The brazier glows the way a good tool glows, only because the rule allowed it. No brighter, no worse. The market man with the myth strolls past the cordon with a face that has invented a better story overnight. He tries it on the air and decides to save it for later. A midwife's lintel outside the yard wears yellow instead of red. Someone believed someone's sentence at last. Near the cooper's stall, a widow folds to the cobbles and is lifted by two strangers who have practiced making a chair of their hands. The velvet voice finishes the page. The crowd lets itself be commended because it costs nothing at this hour. Your errands are not ceremonial. You are final witness and courier of consequences. First duplicate to the warden, quiet passage, fines for cup losses, sick list first, ratio to be posted each dawn. He signs as if his letter were always there and gives you the look that adds one more line to your spine. I saw. Second duplicate to the captain, yesterday's ration sheet repaired by paste and thread, the ring chalked, the arithmetic copied fair. She reads with the appetite of someone who learned to like numbers more than adjectives. She nods and keeps walking. Third to the guild, hung where money pretends to be tidy during daylight. Snowfall of paper that settles dust without cleaning blood. Over yesterday's shut-ups for false oath, someone has nailed the muster sheet for the king's levy, wide as whatever comes next. Names start to bud at the bottom, where pride and debt keep their appointment. You finally take the measurement you've been avoiding. Peas bought this. Not glamour. Obedience. Not luxury. Lanes that move, stomachs fed, wounds tended. And a harvest of men promised for later because a straight line is attractive to more than a cook. The sick roster is pinned over the cup pegs by the shed. Blue thread first. Yellow where tomorrow's fatigue lives. White for steady. Vinegar coins clink in the ladles at the chest and sound like the hymn exhausted people actually enjoy singing. Chests of fines grown into carts. The wheels squeal and then behave when somebody shames them with grease. A parchment-marked misadventure for a slip at the wet flags goes into the docket and will be retold later as mercy. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash on a brick. The priest who scolded chalk charms yesterday watches it die and decides to respect devices for a week. The drawer in your coat taps once against your ribs, as if reminded it exists. The secret slate of spared cups. The three men whose names you kept off the queue because their luck had finally decided to work with you. And the side list of tents you warmed against orders when the night wind made fools of lungs and pride. Leak, burn, or file. You hold both ledgers like hot bread. Leak would be honest and brief. You would be too. It would splash in the square like a good sin and die when nobody wanted to adopt it. Burn would be quick and teach you nothing but how to run colder. File is the story your corner of the world survives by. It puts proof where questions with hats will find it and where gossip without chores will not. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger and listen for the click that promises tomorrow will be permitted to ask you why. File. The steward finds you as men with enamel always do. He offers a badge, a small moon meant for your chest. Mark more wisely, he says, polishing a verb he doesn't know how to use. The guildmaster occupies the shade near your shoulder and offers the mercy that doesn't ask to be thanked. Sanctuary, if needed, till the pest passes. He means a pallet somewhere patient. The warden crosses the yard as if he owns it and gives you the look again. I saw. You answer all three with what you own. Keys, cord, brazier. Silence. Your wrists say here. You are staying where the ring says go. Public reading starts again because Velvet believes in threes. The drum slips a spine under the notice. Key rings stacked like teeth laugh at a joke small enough to live in a belt. The captain's clerk flits in long enough to check the knot on the ration sheet and disappears before the market man can hire his breath. The sacrist rubs his palm along the church door the way a man pets a dog that has finally learned to sit. He lets it keep quiet without his hand for a change. A runner from the alderman tries you with a chit that has learned humility since last night. Open by order, the wax whispers. You set it under your palm, and your hand decides. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to pay for it later, with an explanation to the only person who deserves your braver voice, the woman whose boy slept under a canvas you warmed without permission because rules are supposed to keep people alive, not busy. The market man sells a new argument to a customer who was only passing. Glue for guts, he tests, and hears himself in a new light. The board ignores him the way old wood knows how to outrun adjectives. A boy counts the white and blue threads on the sick roster and asks what red would mean. Not here, you say. He grins like a person who just learned what kind of town he lives in. You dole the last of the morning's issue, a blue thread cup steadied by a wrist that trusts your ladle more than its own shoulder, and pull the ring of chalk back to its courage with the heel of your hand. The kettle whispers compliance. Steam makes its offer to the air and doesn't ask to be thanked. The steward tries the badge again, enamel learning nothing from refusal. Mark more wisely, he repeats, as if the fault were grammar's. The guildmaster says the sanctuary sentence a second time, and this time adds the word please, which you pretend you didn't hear because debt makes it hard to breathe. The warden does what he does best in your direction, not nothing, not much. I saw. You are worth being witnessed without anyone taking credit. A woman with a yellow tag in her pocket brushes by the board and touches the notice with 2 fingers. The priest sees her and does not scold her for magic, because device, not charm, is a sermon he can live with this week. The apothecary tries to rent his line again, small beer and peas balance humors, and finds he likes how it sounds when the men it saved are not obliged to listen. You walk the yard with the day's last duplicates, teach a clerk to tie a notice to a peg with string that will survive the weather, replace a rotten pin with a thin strip cut from the captain's spare sash, lift one corner of the muster sheet to let a fly escape. You sign nothing you didn't write. You seal nothing you didn't watch get sworn. You let paper be the part of courage that can sit still. The drawer in your coat stays shut. It has earned its chance. Questions will knock. Gossip won't find the handle. Between the kettle and the bar, you practice keeping your hands busy enough that no one can hire your mouth. If it were your bench and your ring in your drawer, if the badge shone and sanctuary called and the warden saw, what would you do with the slate and the list, leak, burn, or file? Put your word in where you're watching from in the mess tin below. I count those after the last ladle cools, and the brazier decides it was always meant to be iron. By noon, the extracts on the board have become furniture. People lean on them and forget a time when paper had to prove itself. The levy clerk finds a way to keep his line moving without explaining his face. Chests of fines go to the cart, and the wheels perform their little purr again as proof that grease can be a policy. A parchment-marked misadventure finds its file. The last rosemary bundle exhales to ash. You pick up the dipstick, slip it into the kettle, watch the wet notch kiss the chalk, and feel something settle that isn't merely broth. Justice today was airflow and cup budget. Mercy was policy, not indulgence. Survival was the quiet choreography of chalk, threads, and staves performed by people who do not need to be thanked to do it again. You were the hinge. No song will remember which way you swung. The men will swear tomorrow that peas were always part of the plan. They will be right. The road taught them. You chalk the next ring all the same, because plans are what work looks like after it finishes introducing itself.